I'm Ruben Nepales with Rappler, and now we have Clint Ramos. Congratulations, Clint!
Thank you, Ruben.
And it's been almost a decade since you created the costumes for Imelda in the off-Broadway production. In what way is your approach different in designing Imelda's costume this time from 2014? And how does having Ariel play Imelda this time inspire or influence you in your costume design for Imelda?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I, I am very familiar with these clothes. I was a martial law baby and I was at the revolution. So I kind of was very aware of Imelda's style, right? And how that sort of dictated a lot of the style in the Philippines during the regime, right? And I remember my mother, in my mother like really looked at the way Imelda was dressing, and so did a lot of women during that time, and I think a lot of folks didn't know that, you know, uh, one of the good things that came out of that regime was really this push to wear the national dress, that's always been present in terms of the costume design and my knowledge of it. But this time, Ariel is shaped differently. We've had fantastic Imeldas over the years, but I think Ariel is maybe in terms of the way she is, her physicalization is sort of the most different, and I think for me, it was really just adjusting to that, leaning in a little bit into that kind of pop disco sensibility. She has a fantastic figure, so it was not it was very hard to mess her up. So, but I just, I think the designs remain the same for most part. I did a couple of adjustments, and like for the Order 1081 dress, I redesigned that, and and then the finale dress, I redesigned that for Ariel because that's so bespoke. But really, it's really how then for me, how do you not duplicate a historical figure, right? But rather kind of draw inspiration from that historical figure, and then kind of transmute that into a new thing on Broadway. So like it's not about like making her look exactly like that historical figure. It really is about creating a new thing.
I read that you first saw Imelda Marcos in person when you were 13 and she went to your high school. What do you still remember about seeing her in during that time?
No, I actually was. It was in the palace. We were brought there, and I had spent high school in Manila in the Philippine Science High School, and there was I forget what event it was, and she was pinning medals on us. I remember that I remember that it was, I remember being very sort of anxious and uh I think this idea that had been created about Imelda and the Marcoses when I was growing up, all of that sort of um the packaging of them as stars, as a young child that took, it made a dent, and so when I when I met her, which was very brief, right? It all kind of made sense, right? Like I actually remember how she smelled, her perfume, but I also remember sort of meeting somebody. I had never met anybody like that, like somebody who I knew held so much power, you know. And she was tall, and I remember her skin, and all of that sort of that myth of Imelda kind of like materialized in front of me, right? And so it was really meeting somebody like, you only I think the myth making machine actually really worked on me. You know, and I think that's really important for folks to know, you know, that sort of image building had been cultivated throughout that regime, and that, you know, that was part of the whole, you know, even the Malakas and Maganda myth, right? That was part of that. And so to me, looking back at it, it's like, oh, you know, what was designed worked on somebody who was, you know, I was a kid, you know, at that point, apolitical. And so in a large way, I understood it. I understood, the effect happened on me. And now looking back, you know, it's like, oh, of course, it was all part of that whole thing, you know.
And how important do you think Here Lies Love is as a chronicle of those Marcus years, especially since they are charges that they are attempting now to revise or rewrite those chapters in their history?
I think it's very important, right? We know that the Philippines is a template or a petri dish for disinformation, right? And we know this from uh, the Cambridge Analytica stuff that happened in 2013. And so to me, it is very important. And I think we are uniquely poised to say something about disinformation and vis-a-vis history, right? While it is a piece of art, it is a Broadway musical. It is not a history lesson or a book, or it's not a, you know, any sort of like history nonfiction book, right? It isn't that. But what it is that it holds this sort of emotional truth, right? And the truth for us that we want to highlight is that these leaders, you know, who end up holding power for such a long time and actually um, taking the country into turns that are deleterious to the country. Those leaders actually come from humble beginnings, you know, or even obscure beginnings, right? And it's important for us to identify who those leaders are because they are in our midst, right? I think as democracies all over the world become in peril, I think for us it is important to actually, us as a global community, know that these leaders, they're not, you know, they're not mythical creatures, you know, that they're human beings, and that for us, we we need to be able to identify them, you know, because they are part of our society, right? And so maybe if we identify them, then we can understand how to prevent um these long oppressive regimes, you know. And so to me it's really really, I think it's important, and there's a way that art can do it that only art can, you know, which is provide this sort of narrative, a story seen through the prism of art, and um you can apply a lot of filters, you know, the filter of irony, for instance, that history, when told just in history's sake, is cannot do that. You know, you can provide a lot of like a third person eye into it, and so to me, you know, I think it's important that folks understand that Here Lies Love is not a, you know, nonfiction history lesson. You know, it is a piece of art rooted in history, with a group of artists who are interested uh, in helping combat disinformation.
And for my last question, as one of the show's producers, creative consultant, and costume designer, how do you feel about being part of the This Is History making? Because this is the first all Filipino cast in on Broadway.
Gosh, it is overwhelming, Ruben, to be honest. Like I feel like, you know, it is such a watershed moment for Filipinos. It's never happened on Broadway, where we have an all Filipino cast, you know, and the team with a deep well of Filipino co-producers. and two of us are lead producers on it. So that's never happened on Broadway, right? And so to us, it's beyond just a Broadway show. It is a cultural project, right? It is about our identity. It is about sort of reckoning with our own personal histories. We have young members in the cast who are directly removed from that history. I mean, for Leia, Jose, and I was a martial law baby, so I understand that history. I think it's pretty profound that it's happening right now. But also, I think the profundity of it goes beyond how we're producing this, but also as we see that history is being repeated. I think for us, it's important to actually, this is the perfect time for Here Lies Love, this piece of art, to actually come into the zeitgeist. I think as a global community, as a binational community, because we have partners from the Philippines too, I think Here Lies Love is one of those pieces of art that actually makes you think, right? I know a lot of young philams who come see our show, or not even philams, but just like young folks who come to see our show, or any audience member who have come to see our show and had no idea, anything about the Philippines, didn't know anything about a complicated relationship with the United States, having been a colony for close to 50 years, or about the Marcoses, or about Ninoy and the People Power Revolution. No idea that that's part of their life. Because even if you're not Filipino, if you're American, you are part of Philippine history.
Well, congratulations again, Clint. We can wait to watch it again. Hopefully, we
Oh,
can
please
watch it
come
again soon.
again. Please come again. This time you and
And
Janet have to be on the floor.
yes, and this time we'll see you. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Salamat. Bye-bye.
Salamat.